So first of all, a little bit disingenuous. I'm not actually going to talk about the artificial pancreas because we don't believe that it should be called an artificial pancreas. In fact, what we're doing is automating insulin delivery. A number of reasons why we believe that that's a better description of what we're doing. Sets expectations a little more realistically. So why is this an important thing to talk about? The fact is that there's almost 10% of the world is directly affected by diabetes. The majority of diabetes, when you hear that somebody has diabetes, more often than not, that's type 2 diabetes. There's actually many types of diabetes beyond type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is traditionally known as juvenile diabetes. There's also gestational diabetes and a couple other types. Diabetes, when not controlled through diet and exercise, and that's type 2 I'm talking about, ultimately results in insulin-dependent diabetes. People who have type 1 diabetes are immediately dependent on insulin. That's the only thing that'll work. If they don't get insulin, they'll die. They have to be on it right away. There's 2 to 3 million people in this country alone who are at that state. They require insulin to live every day. What does that mean? If you don't have much experience with living with type 1 diabetes or insulin dependent, let me explain a little bit about that. It's a feedback loop. It's a sense, decide, act feedback loop that's affecting blood glucose. That's my son, by the way. He's 17. He's had diabetes for 7 years. And you just do this loop, and that seems pretty easy, right? How hard can it be? Well, it's actually pretty hard. This is the #1 most difficult chronic disease to manage. Takes about an hour a day. It's very different from other chronic diseases in the sense that it's not a procedural disease. To the uninitiated, you might think that the pricking of your finger to get a blood glucose sample and the injection of insulin, that's the burden of diabetes. That's not the burden of diabetes. That's just the part of managing diabetes that you see. The actual difficulty is coming up with the cognitive part of it. I would assert that living with diabetes is it's a thinking disease. It's constantly on your mind. Somebody sat down and did a taxonomy of the number of tasks associated with successfully managing insulin-dependent diabetes, and there's about 750 things you need to know in order to not die and succeed and have a long life with type 1 diabetes. It is possible, but it's a lot of work. Uh-oh. Why isn't this moving? I think I might need some IT support here. Oh, whoa. That's not good. All right, let's try again. All right. So the reality of insulin-dependent diabetes is when you walk out of the hospital after you're diagnosed, you're given 2 or 3 days of training on how to finger stick, how to count carbohydrates in your meals. You're given a vial of insulin and basically told good luck. Insulin will kill you. It's a wonderful life-saving thing. You take too much of it and you'll go into a hypoglycemic coma and die. It's kind of like flying an airplane. There is no fail-safe. You have to maintain a certain flight level. If you take too much insulin, you'll die. If you don't take enough insulin, you'll die. So dangerous drug, indiscriminate. It affects people from premature babies to octogenarians. And you have to do this all the time. You have to manage this dosing all the time. I was saying to somebody last night that it takes about 6 hours to go from a safe place to a near-death experience with diabetes if you're not paying attention. So what that means is you have 4 chances a day to die. So imagine, you're driving along and you have a close call in a car once a month. Just imagine you get that 4 times a day. So it's a tremendous burden. And it's a burden that we decided we were going to do something about. 4 of us got together just about 2 years ago. We're up on our 2-year anniversary. All of us have children with type 1. All of us live in families with type 1 diabetes. And we decided that the status quo was unacceptable. We decided that innovation in medical devices was too slow, that the incumbents were not motivated to reduce the burden of diabetes, and we were going to do something about it. So we embarked upon a mission to improve the lives of people with diabetes. We founded a company. We are now at 40 employees. We've just completed our Series A financing. We're well funded. We are located right here in Silicon Valley. In fact, we are just about 3 miles from where we sit right now. It was not a long drive for me to come here this morning. And what are we doing? We're developing an automated insulin delivery system. We've chosen as the center of our system not an insulin pump, which is the traditional center of diabetes universe. We've decided instead to take advantage of another fairly powerful computing platform that everybody's got in their pocket now called a smartphone. So this has become the center of our diabetes ecosystem, where you are now interacting with your chronic disease instead of with a strange device that invites curiosity and questions every time you whip it out in public. What's that thing? Instead, as far as anybody's concerned, you're just answering a text when, in fact, you're managing your chronic disease through your smartphone. The other small benefit that you get from a smartphone is you're now connected. So I look at this as this is just an ecosystem, and we are a data science company, because at the end of the day, it's the data that we're bringing back to the center of our cloud computing platform that's going to allow us to have a sustainable competitive advantage. The components of the system, we've got the physical hardware, which as you can see is fairly tiny. It's basically an insulin pump, an insulin delivery system. As well, in the lower right-hand corner there, there's a small subcutaneous sensor that gets implanted just under the skin. It's about the thickness of a human hair. The sensor itself gets implanted. There's a little Bluetooth radio with an ASIC on top that sends a signal every 5 minutes to the pump body here, and then the pump body's where the brains are. Little math works inside there, and then we use as the interface to the therapy the app. What I don't show here is the cloud. There's a whole bunch of cloud stuff going on top. So what does that mean? What does automating insulin delivery mean? I think we can take examples from other domains where automation can mean you're start out doing something manually. You might be manually sensing something, and then you automate that with a sensor. You might be manually deciding what to do using something like a sliding scale insulin rubric. And then you might automate that with something like a bolus wizard. So in fact, the automation of insulin has been a progression. It's not a big bang thing. And it's only recently that the constituents have come together, the puzzle pieces have come together that we can actually build a complete puzzle. And what I mean by that is, insulin pumps have been around in various forms for about 20 years. These continuous glucose monitors have been around for about 10 years now, and they're finally accurate enough to include in a feedback control system. Control algorithms have been around for a long time, right? We've got PID, which is 100 years old. Model predictive control is 50 years old. These are not new concepts. And a couple of people asked me, well, why don't you just wait for the cure? Why don't you just wait for the cure for insulin-dependent diabetes? The problem with that is that people have been promised a cure for the past 70 years. The cure is only 5 years away. There'll be a pill, just on the news that it's just been cured in mice again, right? Diabetes has been cured in mice 300 times. So you start to become a little bit jaundiced by that and realize that's actually a really tough problem to solve the autoimmune response. And so instead, we're taking a very pragmatic engineering approach to this thing. We're combining things that have been around for a long time. Insulin's been around for 95 years. We're taking mature technologies with high technology readiness levels, and we are combining them into a system. Which is really no different from what we see in other domains. And when I'm talking to lay people about what control is, just as a reminder that the only reason we do control is to transfer variability from a place where it hurts to a place where it doesn't hurt as much in order to make a human's job easier. That's why we do control, right? The cruise control is transferring variability in speed, which hurts, to variability in fuel consumption, where it doesn't hurt as much, and so on. So what are we doing with automated insulin delivery? We're transferring variability in blood glucose to variability in insulin titration. What does that mean? Pragmatically speaking, our automated insulin delivery system is a combined feed-forward, feedback controller. The reason it's not a pure feedback controller, because that would be great, is that we have a fundamental dynamic mismatch between the speed of the actuator and the speed of the disturbance which is entering the process. There's about 25 things that impact blood glucose: stress, exercise, illness, sleep deprivation, smoking, caffeine, and another 15 things. The problem is insulin, when delivered subcutaneously, and the insulin analogs that are used, it takes about half an hour. There's a half an hour of transport delay. So when you inject insulin, it takes half an hour to get to the liver and start doing something. Carbohydrates are almost instantaneous. Furthermore, the time constants of insulin, time constant is around 2 hours, and the time constant of carbohydrates is around 15 to 30 minutes. So you eat, and your blood glucose goes high instantly, and the insulin, which brings you down, takes a half an hour to even start delivering, and then takes a very long time to have an action. So there's this notion of using feed-forward control or meal announcement that is required for any practical closed-loop system delivering insulin. You have to, at every meal, tell the system, hey, I'm going to eat now. And then the feedback control will compensate for any mismatches you might have had in carbohydrate counting, for instance. This physiology that I showed here, this little model here, there's some challenges with it. One of the challenges is that it actually changes over time. People are not static plants. Their physiology and behavior changes over time. This is snapshots of my son over 30 different instances showing what his three main gains have done over his diabetes journey. And you can see they've changed by about a factor of 2. It's further compounded by the fact that the response to the same stimulus can vary widely. Being a pretty geeky engineering dad, I annotated every time he would drink a juice box carbohydrate rescue. Every time he was low, I would annotate that and plot the data. So here's what 304 juice boxes look like for him, right? Exact same stimulus, wildly different responses. This is the kind of challenge that we have to be able to address. So we're building one system that needs to work on 1 million different plants. And what I mean by that is that we have changes across the population, we have changes, diurnal variation, changes throughout the day, we have changes with activities, whether they are standing up on a stage presenting, and the stress response, or exercising, what kind of exercise, is it aerobic, is it anaerobic, and then changes over time as you go from a child to puberty, and you've got all of these growth hormones, or pregnancy going through the trimesters and then postpartum. As you go from a sedentary lifestyle to becoming physically active, these things have fundamental changes on your blood glucose physiology. So rather than attempt to do clinical trials to explore these different regimes and do designed experiments on real humans, we're replacing the human with a physiological model, where we're able to model all sorts of different things: the physiology, the behavior, the events, and combinations thereof. And when I worked for Medtronic, I was the one who introduced them to the concept of using model-based design and modeling and simulation as a proxy or replacement or adjunct for clinical trials. And after we had done our work, they said, well, we're still not sure about this newfangled thing called modeling and simulation, so let's go run a trial. So they did 250 subjects, 3 months, who knows how many $1 million that cost. But as you can see, the results were extremely comparable, and we spent about $5 in electricity and one computer running over one weekend to achieve the same result. So when I co-founded Bigfoot 2 years ago, one of the very first things I charted our team to do was build this virtual clinic, this V-clinic, where we leveraged the Amazon Web Services EC2 MATLAB in the cloud environment to do very fast simulations across a very wide range of physiological and behavioral situations that span this time scale from basically about a minute up to decades, so that we could well characterize what our system was going to do. We could put in different algorithms, different control algorithms, different alternatives or tweaks to those algorithms, and do various trade studies to come up with the right algorithm to work across all of these different scenarios. Done using the object-oriented capabilities of MATLAB, wherein we would take a configuration file which would specify what scenario we're trying to run, on what controller, what physiology model, or across what subjects it would produce results, and then we'd be able to analyze it. It's extremely easy to provision with those 6 lines of codes. We just pull it down from GitHub, and off it would go. And then it would generate results like this, where we could say, well, what's the user experience going to be on the app? What are some of the detailed forensics underneath, so we can look at what the model predictions are and some of the other behaviors of the algorithm. So this is just one example of the way that we can use MATLAB to gain insight on what's going on. So the V-clinic really is focused on the blood glucose physiological and behavioral responses and the decisioning algorithms, either the human decisioning algorithms or the algorithms that we're embedding in the pump. And we were very successful in using that initial V-clinic capability to come up with our first clinical trial device. So this device here, it's public that we started this in actual human clinical trials in July. And that went through a very fast development effort. We give huge credit to the MathWorks toolchain as the enabler of that. But what we realized is that when it came time to do system V&V on the algorithm running in our broader system, where we've connected it up to physical hardware and an app, and we're sending Bluetooth communications across everywhere, and we got a human in the loop, that the V&V, while very successful, we realized that we needed to really up our game for the next step. So the next clinical trial is a much more comprehensive one. This is our one right before commercial launch. And so the work that we've now embarked upon is something we're calling the V-Lab. So we got the virtual clinic, where we were looking at these longer timescale things, and now we're creating the virtual lab, the V-Lab, where we're looking at the component interactions with the express purpose of being able to better characterize and do very effective V&V on the system. So this is where we're bringing in Simulink and Stateflow and Polyspace, and we're keeping the same control actions, glucose models in both, and but bringing in some of these other system events, which are known to happen. These are imperfect systems, so your continuous glucose monitor, your CGM can have all of these different faults. They can happen simultaneously, and we need to ensure that our system is robust across all of these different faults. Insulin being infused in an insulin pump has all sorts of unpleasant ways to not work. The insulin can spend too much time in the sun and get denatured. You can pull out the infusion set on a doorknob. You can lose communication, Bluetooth communication, by walking into an environment where there's other communication going on, and so on. So the V-Lab is really about characterizing the sensing and deciding and the component interaction parts. And so we really see this combination of the V-Lab and the V-Clinic as enablers of us to be able to go much faster in our characterization of the system. And I just want to say that this in no way replaces other work that's necessary to do in order to be able to characterize and perform verification and validation of a Class 3 medical device. So we see that there's a way to use the MathWorks toolchain as ways to complement the other work that you just have to do, like 60601 delivery volume accuracy and drop shock, electrostatic, EMI, EMR, wireless coexistence testing, HALT, and so on. But so many of those happen in real time. What I failed to mention is that our vClinic runs 50 million times real time. So in one day, up on the cloud, we can simulate 50 million subject days. And so it's how to take advantage of those kind of things that allowed us to get to market so quickly. In the 2 minutes remaining, I want to talk just a little bit about the other vector that you can take model-based design, which is producing production code. This is my second rodeo. I did it at Medtronic, and now I'm doing it here. Realizing that that is a journey to be able to have an organization that completely embraces the concept of direct-to-code versus hand code. And so we actually started very small, and there's a couple of reasons I'd be happy to share over a beverage out there about why we started small with just the algorithm. And the intent now is to double down on the success of that and broaden our scope of auto-generated code versus hand code and draw a broader system boundary on what we're doing. And we see that both as an advantage for the quality of the code, but more importantly on the verification and validation. In terms of how we've been able to apply these models and simulations, I've spoken about the obvious ones about design of the algorithm and characterization and implementation in code. It's had all these peripheral benefits, like providing evidence during our regulatory submissions to the FDA. The evidence that we bring forward to them to say this is going to be safe and effective in an investigational device. Clinical trial design. We don't have to wonder about what our clinical trial designs are going to do because we simulate them millions of times. We have virtual people walking into our virtual clinic, going through our virtual challenges to come up with virtual results. So these are confirmatory rather than exploratory clinical trials, which is a huge advantage for us. Reimbursement modeling, so we're already thinking ahead to how we are going to go to market with our system. And we can get into things like outcome-based services and pay for performance instead of pay for procedure, which is where all of healthcare is now going because we're going bankrupt by doing it the old-fashioned way. Investor due diligence as they're looking to make investments in our company. We've been able to bring these models forward and demonstrate. User interface design, training, hazard analysis. These are just some of the areas that we've been able to apply these models. So in summary, we've got all these models. They're physiological. There's models of the controllers. There's models of the hardware. There's models of the devices and their component interactions, even of human behavior. Like when somebody sees a donut and they're asked how many carbs are in that donut, there's actually a model for how much carb counting error you might have. Is there bias? Is there variation? So we got models for all that stuff, models for exercise, and so on. We've taken those models and we built a set of simulation factories. The vClinic that I already mentioned, which is the longer time scale, minute to decade. Now we're building the vLab and the vClinic. And at the end of the day, it's so that we can make better decisions faster and get this to market to help our children. I also forgot to mention we got 40 employees and about a third of them have a direct type 1 connection themselves. So they either have children or have diabetes themselves or